Okay, so the last case study, should the missionaries leave? Remember, there was a ban placed on the proselytization of others, and missionaries were told, either to stop preaching or to leave. So the question was, do they obey? Here's how you responded. 69 of you said, no, don't leave, and 16 of you said yes. Very quickly, somebody who said yes, leave, tell me why. Yes. Okay, it is Romans 13, perhaps what you're thinking of, that talks about obeying civil authorities. Okay, and First Peter also talks about that. Anybody else? Yeah. They may be forced to leave sometime if they don't leave under their own power right now. Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
I'd say it could depend on whether God wants them.
Wants
them to leave, then yes.
Yeah, whether God wants them to leave. And of course, the $64,000 question there is, how do they know and how do others know, and do they agree on what they believe God wants them to do? That could get to be a really, really thorny issue. Excellent, excellent answer. Anybody else on the yes side? Okay, how about those who said no? Somebody give me your rationale. Yes?
I mean, I think of the different accounts in Acts where there is a consequence for not preaching, and they said we have to obey God rather than men. And while there is definitely as much as we can in their power, we need to obey government authorities. I think in this case, what God has asked us, what God has asked the missionaries to do is to spread the gospel, and they need to continue doing that.
Okay, so we link Romans 13, which says obey civil authorities, with Acts chapter 5, where Peter and John say we ought to obey God rather than men, which seems to signify that there comes a point when you can't obey both. You have to choose which one you're going to obey. God, for us, is the default. Yes?
I think like two different decisions. Think of like costly grace and cheap grace. And what I think of is whenever you want to leave just because other people will tell you not to minister there, you're sort of having this sort of like comfortable Christian type of vibe. And whenever you have like this costly grace, like how Bonhoeffer says, is you staying into that ministry and you evangelizing that even no matter what the cost.
So you're a Bonhoeffer student, huh? Yeah. Good reading. Mr. Stearns did his master's on that, or maybe even some of his doctoral work. So if you haven't talked to him about Bonhoeffer yet, you should get together with him. He would enjoy chatting with him. Good. All right. Anybody else that answer? Yes. Okay, so by staying, showing them that it's important enough to you that you're willing to take that risk. All right? Yes. Okay, if they're forced to leave one place, they can minister somewhere else. Okay, all right. Good. Yes, sir.
Something that a lot of the missionary stories that we tell or read or hear about have in common is sneaking across borders, running from governments, armies, and people groups. So I think this is a question that's asked in a lot of their stories that they answer, we're not going to leave.
Okay. All right, yeah, you're thinking of Brother Andrew, for example, who smuggled Bibles across the border, and the whole question of ethics comes in. Is it okay to lie to a government under certain circumstances? And if you haven't already taken ethics class, you will, and that's one of the questions that arises in the discussion. It's all very complex. All right, good. Well, I appreciate your responses. It's another one of those case studies that's not that easy to answer. And again, as we've said every time, there are some implications that may not be spelled out, to us that may make a difference in our decision. Let me say this: there are times when the permanence of a missionary in a location such as this, another creative access country, could possibly pose a threat to the well-being of the national believers there are times when the best thing for the foreign missionary to do is leave so as not to draw unnecessary attention as a part of the government to the church. Because the government's well aware of where the nationals, where the foreigners are and what they're doing. And there are times when a missionary's permanence in the country actually presents more of a threat to the well-being of the church than if you were to leave. So it's not necessarily a question of cowardice leaving or lack of faith or something like that. Sometimes it's leaving in consideration of how your staying would affect the work there. That makes sense? Don't think it just because missionaries leave under that type of a circumstance, somehow they're failing God or exercising a lack of faith. That can happen, but it's not automatically the case. Yes? Okay, well, sometimes God does lead people to other places. And there have been times in missions history when missionaries have been divided on this issue in the same situation. When the Congo struggle broke out way back when Helen Roseveare was missionary there, some missionaries, God bless team as you travel. Have a great trip, good game. See you when you get back. Some missionaries decided to leave, others decided to stay. The missionaries themselves were divided on the issue. And I'm not going to try to stand here in judgment of one or the other. Sometimes I believe it may be the will of God for that to happen. Some believe others to stay. Just because they're a missions team doesn't mean that in a crisis situation, God is going to move everybody in the same direction. So again, it all boils down to being filled with the Spirit of God, maintaining a daily walk with God, so that when the crisis comes, you already are prepared spiritually to make a decision. But it's not easy. All right. I would say, though, in principle, if you're leaving just because you're scared, that's the only reason, or you want the easy life or the easy way out or whatever, then you better check your motive. That's not always. All right, well, good. Well, thank you. That's very, very good. I would like to teach a class someday where we do nothing but case studies. Yes, because you learn so much and you can cover so much territory. All right, let's move on to the next of our missionaries. And I'm going to guess that somebody may recognize who this is. The northwest of the United States. Two individuals actually involved here. Anybody recognize these guys? Pardon? All right, how about Marcus Whitman? Ring a bell? Okay. Well, interesting story, and there's a little romance involved in this one. Does God use romance to put the pieces together in the lives of his servants? Of course he does. But the devil will also try to use romance to mess things up. Marcus Whitman only lived 45 years because he was eventually murdered by the Indians. 1802 to 1847. He was an American, and he served in the Pacific Northwest. Who are the Pacific Northwesterners here today? Anybody from the Pacific Northwest? Where? Yeah, okay, yeah, that's west. Northern California or southern? In the middle. All right, hey, we'll take it. Anybody else from Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho? Huh? Washington. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, your family's from Washington. I spent 4 very special years in Washington State, Tacoma, studying at the seminary there that doesn't exist anymore. All right, well, interesting and awkward situation here, because both of these gentlemen that you see in the picture had proposed to the same young lady. And the story gets thicker yet. Actually, the first one to propose was the gentleman in the bottom. His name was Henry Spalding. He also served in the Pacific Northwest in a different location, as you'll see in a moment. And she refused him. And then Marcus Whitman, who was a medical doctor, proposed to her, and he married him. Say, well, that happens. Yeah, it happens. What doesn't happen is what happens next. They both ended up going to the northwest in the same wagon train, and they snuck under the same stars in the same location and in the same big tent. Now, by that time, Henry Spalding had married someone, but both couples were sharing the same tent and newly married. And you can imagine the awkwardness of that situation. Okay, just really, really, really awkward. I think of a better word. And of course, we asked the question, okay, was this the will of God for this to happen? Man, I would like to say yes, because I'd like to say they're both led by God, but man, I have a hard time saying yes to that situation. I would never counsel two couples, especially newly married, to do that. But I'm living in 2019, and this was a different era, and people accepted different, not morally speaking, but the circumstances of traveling. You couldn't go out there just anytime you wanted to. You had to go when there was a wagon train going because there was a question of security, traveling cross country like that. And the urgency of the ministry was compelling all four of them to go. But it was definitely an uncomfortable situation. And yet they both ended up serving God. So what happens? Well, in the case of Marcus and Narcissa Whitman, they settle in the Northwest, and their ministry there becomes almost more of a business than an outreach. And you need to understand that some of that happened almost second nature. They had to support themselves, and there were people coming through their settlement there on their way to other locations. They needed a place to stay, and so the business there naturally developed to help people coming through. But it got out of hand. Some of you may be thinking about business as mission, BAM, they call it. It's a form of tent making where you're actually working to support yourself while you're doing ministry. And that can be a very good tool. But it can also be a burr in your saddle, because when you're doing business as mission, the business has to survive or else you won't stay. And so you dump whatever time and resources are necessary into the business side of it, make sure that it survives so that you can stay on the field. And often what happens is the ministry suffers. Resources, time, energy is given to the business. So I'm not against business as mission. I'm just saying, be very, very careful that you understand what you're getting into. I don't think they understood the implications. Not only that, but the Native Americans there were very suspicious of them because they brought diseases that the Native Americans had never encountered before. And some of them started accusing the missionaries of casting spells on them, or using their medicine to destroy the Native American tribes so that they could take their land and eliminate the Native American life altogether. See? So all of this was churning in this situation. And it appears that the Whitmans really didn't understand what was going on until it was too late. And if you know the story, it's called the Whitman Massacre. In November of 1847, he was at the tender age of 45. A couple of braves came in and basically slaughtered a group, including Narcissa. They didn't kill the other women and children, but they did kill Narcissa, his wife, probably because of that, his wife. And the government, of course, stepped in and took measures, and the thing got really messy and ugly. So what do we learn from that? Well, do we call them martyrs for the faith in this situation? I don't know. I personally try to be really, really careful with how I use the word martyr. Okay, because a martyr is not just anybody that dies on the mission field, right? Or dies in the ministry. Sometimes people are killed purely because of political situations. There have been people killed in the past on the mission field whose murderers didn't even know they were Christians. It was all political. Now you could argue and say, yeah, but God sent them there, and therefore they were in that political situation, in the will of God, in the ministry. So we can go ahead and call them martyrs. I'm okay with that if you want to. I'm just saying, I want to be really careful. There was a time in early church history, as we mentioned the other day, that martyrdom almost became stylish. People wanted to become martyrs so that they could be, revered and remembered, giving their lives for Christ. So would I call the Whitmans martyrs in this case? Probably not, because another thing about martyrdom is I don't believe they were killed because they were believers. They were killed because of what was happening politically on the field, how the natives interpret that. But again, you can disagree with me. Some authors call them martyrs. I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to be cautious. What about Henry Spalding? What happened to him? Well, he ended up, Henry ended up ministering in a different location in Lapwai, Idaho. Now, this is where I'm sorry, on the wrong one. There's where the Whitmans were in Lapwai. I'm sorry, Henry Spalding and his wife, the Whitmans were out here. In fact, if you go out near Walla Walla, Washington today, Danny, you know where Walla Walla is? Yeah, there's a little plaque there, something to remember the Whitman massacre. But the Spaldings were in Idaho, way over here, what is now Idaho, Lapwai area, and their ministry actually blossomed. They saw many come to Christ. The tribe that they worked with was not nearly as violent a tribe as the Native Americans, the Whitmans area of ministry. So it's quite fascinating to compare and contrast the nature of their ministries. Most historians would say that all the dust was settled. The Spaldings actually ended up having the more fruitful ministry, at least from a human standpoint, than did the Whitmans. But you can draw your own conclusions. Remember, history is set for God's history book. History is written by people who are biased and present how they see things happening. And I'll let you draw your own conclusions about the Whitmans. So I know you know this guy. Or at least some of you do. Okay, who is this? Yes, David Livingstone. Right. Not Livingstone. Okay, Livingston. 1813 to 1873. He lived 60 years. He ministered in part of Africa and just loved the African people. It's a really neat story. He was born in Scotland. He was Scottish. In fact, if we have time today, we'll meet the Scottish people. And his country of service was Africa. Now, actually, that's a misprint because Africa is not a country. All right. The reason it's stated this way on PowerPoint is because this was a template that I was using. So I really should change that. He was in the continent of Africa. So that would be, and he was in the southern part, by and large. But he was apparently one of the first Europeans, if not the first European, to encounter a lake. What lake is that? One of the biggest lakes in the world, Lake Victoria. Yeah, beautiful. Actually, David Livingstone was known more for his exploration than he was for his missionary work. And sometimes he's criticized for that. There are some who would actually question whether we should call David Livingstone a missionary at all. They would say he was an explorer. He was a bushwhacker, a trailblazer. But he wasn't a missionary. I think that's an unfair statement. Yes, he did spend the majority of his time discovering new places and making inroads into places where missionaries or other missionaries would eventually follow. But I do believe he was a missionary. He had a love for the people. He shared the gospel with them. And God used him to open the way for many, many other missionaries to access the tribes on the continent later on. And I would say this to you. Some of you are going to be in ministries that may not be as obviously missionary, for example. You may be an IT person working on the field. You may be an MK educator, as some of our colleagues in Brazil were. God may use you in the medical ministry or in the aviation ministry or translation ministry. And because you're not specifically evangelizing in church planting, directly, some may question whether or not you're truly a missionary. I view missions as broader than that. I understand that there are lots and lots of components that work together in order to facilitate the establishing of Christ's church on earth. But it's a multifaceted work. And if you're involved in one of those other ministries and you're contributing toward the end of seeing people come to Christ and churches established, in my book, you're a missionary. Even those who are back home in the home office, even those who stand in classrooms and Bible colleges as missions professors, in my estimation, are missionaries. I am functioning in a missionary role, even though I'm not specifically planting a church on the field right now, because I'm contributing to that end by doing what I'm doing. So I would say that David Livingstone definitely was a missionary. And it took a guy like David Livingstone to do what he did. Very independent. And he would even later regret not having given more time to his wife. He confessed later that he had been negligent of her and left her behind many times, or sometimes forcing her to travel when it really wasn't wise to do so. But again, you struggle with that on the field in the ministry. In a certain situation, do I involve my family or not? Do I go alone for a while, this mission or not? Those are not easy questions to answer. That's why we have to keep coming back to it, maintaining an intimate walk with God day by day. Yeah, Kelly. Pardon me?
Did you struggle with that?
Yeah. On the mission field, what role my family played? I think everybody does. I worked with 1, 2, 3 other American families. We all lived in the same city, on different streets and different neighborhoods, but we all were teaching at the seminary there. And one of the families was very integrated. I mean, their house was open and constantly flowing with Brazilians going in and out, just the way they were. And another family was just the opposite. They ministered to Brazilians, very calculated, very careful to preserve the privacy of their home in order to be a haven for their children and their family. But they definitely had a ministry to the Brazilians. And then we had another family who was kind of a mix, neither extreme. And so we're sitting there thinking, what do we do? Who do we follow? And everybody, in the end, has to ask that question. How does God want me to function in this situation? It's not an easily defined standard for everybody. That's a very good question. But Livingstone, he did spend a lot of time exploring on his own with an African guide, and sometimes his wife went, but usually she did not. He died on the continent, and he requested that his heart be buried in African soil. And tradition at least has it that he died in a kneeling position, perhaps praying. He was 60 years old, but very, very challenging climate, and a lot of malaria. And I don't remember what year quinine was invented. We talked about that in another class, but of course that helped resolve the issue of malaria, although malaria is still an issue. But his body was buried at Westminster Abbey in London. You talk about a highly esteemed man in the eyes of his fellow Englishmen. To be buried in Westminster Abbey was no small thing. Great privilege. Right? David Livingstone. All right, let's move on. Now, this guy I don't expect anybody to get. John Nevius. In fact, I'm going to guess that nobody's heard of him. Anybody ever hear of John Nevius? Excuse me. He is known for the Nevius plan. Okay, and I will talk about that in just a moment. John Nevius lived from 1829 1893. And he was from New York. Okay, who are the New Yorkers here? Anybody here from New York? All right, what part?
Central.
Okay, all right, very good, very good. We were in New York City about 4 years ago visiting, right after they opened the new Freedom Tower, what do they call it? New one? New York City. You know, you're from upstate, but had a great time out there. He served in 2 countries, Korea and Japan, but he's really remembered most for his ministry in Korea. Even though he spent most of it in Japan, it was in Korea that his ideas really began to take off. It was more difficult for him to convince the Japanese to change and to adopt his ideas. But in Korea, which was one of the differences was the Koreans weren't as attached to a major religious idea as the Japanese were. The Japanese very Buddhist and Shinto in their thinking, one being a major religion, the other one being more of a folk religion. But the Koreans were not so much. So there's quite a difference in the way that the gospel took on in Japan and the way it took on in Korea. That's a study for another day. But he spent merely 2 weeks in Korea. And during that time, this method really became popularized. Now, if you read these, I'm going to read them quickly, you'll probably notice that there's really not a whole lot here that surprises us or looks really different from the way we do mission. Christians should continue to live in their neighborhoods and pursue their occupations, being self-supporting and witnessing to their co-workers and neighbors. In other words, missionaries on the field should probably not live primarily in compounds. I'm not going to speak against that, but their idea was let's live among the people in their neighborhoods. 2, missions should only develop programs and institutions that the national church desired and could support. Or to put it another way, a missionary should not start a ministry that the nationals cannot sustain after he's gone. If what he does is only sustainable while he's there, while he's pumping money in from outside, what happens when he dies or he's called home or something? If the people cannot sustain that ministry, a couple of things happen. Number one, they feel really guilty because the thing begins to fall apart. They feel like they're responsible for that, when in reality they're not. Okay? And they feel a burden that they really shouldn't be expected to bear. So it's important that the missionaries evaluate the lifestyle, the conditions, the resources of the nationals and build ministries that are sustainable in that context. The national churches should call on and support their own pastors. Definitely agree with that, and I would say the sooner the better. There are some missionaries out there today who won't even pastor a church. Even if they're the only ones there, they refuse to pastor churches on these fields because they don't want the nationals to become accustomed to an American style of leadership that makes it difficult for the transition later on. So they'll just train people, and when there's a national who's prepared, then they'll usher them into a place of leadership. Churches should be built in the native style with money and materials given by the church members. They expected the nationals to give. When American missionaries go to countries that struggle financially, 2 things happen. On the part of the missionary, there's a tendency to feel like I've got to pump money into this because I'm a rich missionary, I'm a rich American. Even though you're a poor missionary when you're home on furlough, but when you're in the field, you're a rich American. And so I got to pump money into this because after all, God's blessed me. That's one temptation. And the other side, from the nationals, to feel like I have nothing to give. What I drop in the offering plate, means absolutely nothing compared to what the American give. So how do you deal with that? Well, balance is the key. I don't think it's in one extreme or the other, but I do believe that when you start to work among nationals in another country, from day one, they need to understand that they are expected to contribute, and they will be the major contributors to this work. And I would often quote passages like 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9, where the Macedonians, in the depth of their poverty, begged for an opportunity to share in the ministry of the grace of God giving. They were the ones that were poor. And yet, in their poverty, their hearts welled up in richness, generosity. And I would even use illustrations like the feeding of the 5,000, say God can do more with your money than you think. And that's not I'm promoting the idea of a miracle that they stick a one real in Brazil in the offering plate that by the time it gets to the front, it's going to be 10 reais. Nothing. I'm just saying, don't. And I would tell them things like this: the size of your heart is more important than the size of your wallet. That's what God's looking at. Your heart's in the right place. Your money will be in the right place. Where your treasure is, there your heart be also. Anyway, there are lots of ways to deal with that. That's an important thing. Intensive biblical and doctrinal instruction should be provided for church leaders every year. He was big on that. There was a time in history when most European or American missionaries felt like a lot of the nationals in other countries didn't have what it takes to lead. So the missionaries would call the shots, and the nationals would run their errands and do things at their beck and call. And I thank God that that attitude has changed today. You serve God in the field, and God has given the nationals in every country of the world all the resources they need, trained, learned, become leaders, assume responsibility for their church. Don't ever question, don't ever doubt that. Okay, so these are all things we take for granted today, but there were novel ideas, at least in many places, at the time that John Nevius was ministering. That's pretty much what he's remembered for. All right, little mid-class quiz here. God uses men who are weak and feeble enough to lean on him. Any idea who made that statement? This is a famous missionary. You've all heard of him. Any guesses out there? Went to China. Pardon? Him? Yep. That's Hudson Taylor. That's who it was. Well, Hudson Taylor. Lots of neat things. Here's another guy who was a fragile, frail vessel of clay whom God used. 1832 to 1905, we're dipping into the 20th century now, at the end of his life. All right. Born in England, served in China, and probably had no idea that someday China would be what it is today, economically, politically, influencing the world. But God opened the door for him there. Enculturation is an interesting term. It refers to becoming like the nationals, the people to whom you're serving, among whom you're living. And so, he had this idea that to look like a European would distract from his ministry. People would be so caught off guard by who he was that they wouldn't be able to embrace his message. Yes, ma'am.
I remember they used to call white people there like white devils.
Yes.
So it was very, very much not just
Yes, they were called foreign devils. You're right. That's very good. Yes, and anybody who was, especially Europeans. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Very well liked.
Mm-hmm. They were killed, yeah. In fact, we're going to talk about the stamps just a little bit here. They're not today, Thursday. Probably Thursday. Good, good. I'm glad you did that. That's a very fascinating story. Yeah. Good. Yeah, very touching story. So he decided he was going to dress like a Chinaman. He dyed his hair. In fact, if you've read some about him, does anybody here remember what happened when he was trying to dye his hair? Almost disastrous.
Fell out.
Pardon? No, it didn't fall out. That would have been disastrous too. But something else happened. He was,
Found a wife when he died there.
well, he did find a wife. And in fact, when she first met him, she thought this guy's really strange. But guys, you know, if a girl thinks you're strange at first, don't despair and change your mind. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he was using a very flammable substance to dye his hair, and it just about caught on fire. If it had caught on fire, it literally burned his head off. I mean, it just about destroyed him. But he was determined. So his dress, even his hair, he had blue eyes, that he couldn't change. You know, he and what's her name? Amy Carmichael. But I had an interesting conversation about that. She went to India. Okay, so now, not only did he believe that it was good for him to do that, but he insisted that anybody that worked with him follow suit. It's one thing for your missionary colleague to say, this is what I believe I should do, but when a colleague says, we're all going to do this, then things get a little dicey. Not everybody wanted to become so Chinese. Now, it's not that they didn't love the Chinese, it's just that that they didn't feel it was necessary, and it was an inconvenience, and so on. And let me say this to you, it is not always a good idea to try to imitate the nationals among whom you're serving. Because in many places, they will consider that offensive. They'll think you're mocking them because you're trying to look like them and act like them. So again, balance is a key word here. Told you last week, didn't I, about cheering for the Brazilians when they were playing the United States? It didn't go over very well. Okay, when people come from other countries to live among us, we expect them to trash all of the trinkets of their culture and their customs. No, we don't. In fact, we would think it kind of strange if they completely abandoned everything that they had and what they were in their homeland. And so, you know, there is room for discussion about this. And they had a discussion. This is the group that went, and I'm thankful for a fairly well-preserved photo. And you see Hudson Taylor and his family right here in the middle, and a Maria Dyer, okay, his first wife. And this is the team that went with him. And in this particular picture, they're not dressed like Chinamen because I'm guessing they just arrived. This may even be a photo that was taken before they left. I'm not totally sure. But this is the team. Now, right here is a gentleman who served as an iron worker. He was a blacksmith, tough guy. And he had a very strong personality to go with it. And this is his wife. And he was dead set against this idea. And he raised enough of a stink about this that he actually ended up leaving the team and returning home. And this influenced and really poured cold water on the missionary zeal of the team in general. To what extent did he have an argument? Everybody understood that William Carey was the leader. Okay, that's one thing you have to understand in this story. He was the leader of this team, and and he had told them before they left this is the way it was going to be, and they went along with it. But there came a point they got there that just too over the top for some of them. So this guy finally rebelled and left, and the mission just about went under because of that, but it survived. And later on, Maria dies, and see this lady sitting right next to him on the left, Arlen, looking at the picture. She becomes his second wife. Awkward, right? No, nobody knew that when this picture was taken because obviously his first wife was still living. They lost children on the field as well. I mean, there was a lot of heartache. And in situations like this, Hudson Taylor or others on the team could very easily stop and ask, is God in this? If this is the will of God, if this is the plan for reaching China, then why all of this disunity? Why these problems? And there are people who have quit the ministry. They're out today because of things like that. Just can't figure out how God could possibly be in a ministry facing so much difficulty. I'm just going to tell you, we serve a real enemy. And we talk about the world, the flesh, and the devil. We talk a lot about the world and the flesh, and we don't say much about the devil in our culture. And I think we're mistaken. Right? And that's for another class. But he's at work. And the fact that there's disunity should not communicate to us that we're out of the will of God, that this isn't God's plan. All you have to do is read the book of Acts and see the same types of problems existed in the early church. Nobody concluded because of that this wasn't God's will. Right? He stuck it out. He was a plotter, just like William Carey was. Continued to work. An amazing story, and I commend it to you for further reading. Some of you may be doing your biography reading on some of these people we're talking about. That's totally fine. There's a lot there about Hudson Taylor and his family. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. Who's this? Very short.
Gladys Albert,
Uh-huh.
not Gladys Albert.
What is she a short?
Yeah, I don't know how tall Gladys Aylward was. We'll talk about her. Yeah. No. Grace Lester was redhead, of course. She would be able to fit belly. Yeah. Short. Southern Baptist. Yes. Lottie Moon. Charlotte Lottie Moon. Good for you. Anybody know how tall she was? 4 foot 3 inches. Yeah. But man, she was 6'8" in her inner being. She was tough, a tough little gal. 1840 to 1912. So she died just before the outbreak of World War I. She was from Virginia. Do we have any Virginians here? Or anybody close to there? Anybody from the eastern seaboard? All right, yeah, you're from North Carolina. All right, anybody else from the Carolinas? Yeah, some weather issues. Did that affect your family close to
It was right over my hometown. I was.
Really?
They're fine. It was
Wow.
good in my area.
Wow. Okay, praise the Lord, everybody's fine. Okay. 4 foot 3 inches. So I meant to measure myself so I can give you an idea, but it'd be around, I'll be up somewhere near my buckle. You didn't mess with Lottie. Should tell you how it is before you get off. I'm glad. Served in China also. And see the region where her ministry took place. She felt very limited by the male missionaries. Now, understand the historical context, okay? Ladies, I have good news for you. Today, in our circles, for the most part, the voice of the woman on the mission field is highly respected and valued. Now, I'm not going to speak for everybody. You have some chauvinist out there, okay? But I remember the good relationship that we had with ladies on our field, and not just married ladies, but single gals. When we would have our meetings twice a year, a January regional meeting in Northeast Brazil. Brazil's huge, and so we divided up into 3 regions. We met in January and then again in June. And one of them was more of a business meeting. The other one was a little bit more just getting together and having fellowship. But our single gals would raise their hands and make suggestions, and they were listened. They were respected. And married gals as well. And I just thank God for that. One year I served as the president of the Northeast region, and sometimes we get into healthy discussions and hands would go flying up, and I had to make a list of who would raise their hand, make sure I gave everybody a chance to talk. The women were just as free to share their opinions as the men were, and many times their opinions became motions that passed and affected our life and there. So that's good. But Lottie didn't live in that era. Lottie lived in an era where the women were basically expected to take care of the children, take care of the homes, and do the whatever types of things the missionaries needed done. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but that's kind of the way they felt. And Lottie, you need to understand, is one of many single gals that felt that way. They were gifted, many of them were articulate, but they often felt suppressed their ability to use their gifts. So it's a fascinating subject, but she was faithful. And the impact on Lottie Moon today is the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. If you go online and just type that in, you'll see that come up. Every year, the Southern Baptist Convention engages in a huge Lottie Moon Christmas offering that goes to help people in other places. That is her legacy. But very gifted. All right. Somebody mentioned this one. There's Mary Slessor, and she was redheaded, although this is kind of get the idea. It's not a totally black and white. What do you call that? That kind of color. Technicolor? Yeah, thank you. Another single gal, amazing. She had a rough home life. She was growing up, Mary Slessor did. From 1848 to 1915. And Scottish, just like who else we studied? David Livingstone was also Scottish. And she served in West Africa. And man, did she love the people. She and David Livingstone had this in common. They had a deep, deep love for the people of Africa. And she was a lot like Livingstone in her personality too. She wasn't afraid to get up and go all by herself, even when her colleagues said, "That's not a good idea." She didn't care. She was a high-risk person, and was willing to pull all the stops and go after it. And part of that she learned by growing up, because she had a rough home life, very, very difficult, and it toughened her up. And I will say this to you: whatever your home life was growing up, thank God for it, because He will use it to your advantage for His glory in your ministry. If you're sitting here thinking, I'm crippled because of something that happened in my background, you're mistaken. Right? You can't go back and change that. Maybe part of that's something you did, or part of your fault, or whatever it is. Okay, assuming that you confessed it, if it involved you or whatever it was, just believe that God is going to use that somehow as a contribution to your ministry ability. Open doors, opportunities that others may not have and not them down your road. So this is certainly the case for Mary Slessor. Tough life. She served in areas that even the men were afraid to tread. She went deeper into the heart of the region where she was, where men were afraid to go because of the intensity of the tribal conflict and that sort of thing, politics. And she ended up going to a place called Okoyong, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she was actually elected as the vice consul there. That's pretty amazing. She had quite an influence there. When we get to Glass Aylward, we'll see something similar happening in China. And Mary Slessor loved the people. She became very African. And in fact, she even got her name on a 10-pound sterling note at one point. I like that. That shows you the respect and the honor that the African people paid her, pun intended, by being a woman of God, having the courage to take the message of the gospel. Amazing story. All right. Now we're up to date to where we're supposed to be starting today's class. All right. So I'm going to shift gears real quick. You thought I was gonna let you go, didn't you? Not so easy. But we don't have a lot of time. I just want to, at least anybody have any questions about these? We've only touched on a few of them.
You talked about,
Nevius?
yeah, Nevius. I have two questions about that. First of all, do like our modern missionary associations adopt that ideology?
In part, a lot of people had this idea. It would be mistaken to say that John Nevius invented this. It's probably more accurate to say that he developed it, he promoted it, he canonized it, if you will. Because a lot of times people out there have these kinds of ideas, but it takes somebody special who can publish it, organize it, put it together. I think really that's what he's known for. There were other people that shared his convictions, his ideas. He's really remembered for the one that kind of put it together and got it out there.
And my second question is, like, as somebody who's a classical major, this probably I'll be dealing with this a little. How do you get over the fact that it's awkward to ask for money for support?
Okay. All right. Actually, we're going to talk about that in a future class. I'm not trying to put you off, but we are going to talk about fundraising, that particular issue, because there are a lot of people in this class, I guarantee it, who want nothing to do with asking for money. It's just not your personality or your temperament type. If you can hold on just a little bit, we will get to that in a discussion. Thanks. Any other questions about these stories or comments? Like, let me just open up another one here. Okay, what's the next name on your list? The next individual. You don't have one? Can I see your notes? Oh, just a number one. Oh, that doesn't help us any, does it? Good, you got it. All right. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, he opened up the one with the answers in it. Good. Yeah. Recognize this guy? He just said it. C.T. Studd. How many of you have heard of C.T. Studd? Okay. Interesting character. Look, just about the time you think that God uses a certain kind of person to be a missionary, God throws somebody else in the mix that's totally different. If somebody asks you the question, what kinds of people does God use as missionaries? Your best answer is, that's the wrong question. The question is, what kind of people does God not use in mission? The answer is, nobody. There are all kinds of people out there. Some of the most unlikely candidates to serve in a certain location God uses. But why does he do that? Because he wants the glory. And C.T. Studd was one of these guys. He was born in 1860. He lived in 1931, 71 years. He was from England. And what was he famous for in England? He played a game that Josh Statler likes to play. What is it? Cricket. You do play cricket, right? Yeah. We were in India. Well, Daniel, my son, went with me one year, and he played a little bit, and I was intrigued, but we brought back a bat. And Josh told us it was one of the nicest brands. That was cool. Somebody brought that. Anybody here ever played cricket before? So, ooh, wow, okay. All right. So we have. I still don't understand the rules I'm learning. It's somewhat complex. The other day we watched some clips when Josh came over for lunch, and he was explaining some things to us about how it works. Because we're zoned into baseball with their similarities, and so he was trying to explain some of the ins and outs of the game. Is it true that matches still today can go for several days, a single match? Okay, yeah.
3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days. Yeah. Yeah. India, we were in India when the World Cup of cricket was going on. And did I understand you correctly that England won it for the very first time? They're the ones that invented the game, and they won it for the first time? Yeah. Hey, that's, I got to hand it to them. I'm happy for them, Got to be happy for our English brother. All right. Well, I'm from England. My roots are somewhere in England. So he was a star cricket player. In fact, some think that he was one of the best that ever played the game. And you see him now. Who are these guys? This doesn't look like a cricket team, right? Well, he was part of the team of 12 called the, oh dear. I can't remember let me back up. I can't remember the name. There's a certain title given to this group. But of these cricketers with whom he played, several decided to serve the Lord on the mission field. So this is a group of them. They were cricket players, and they decided to serve God together. A fascinating story. Now, C.T. Studd was very, very type A, capital, bold, underlined, italicized. He was, I mean, that's part of why he was such a good, he was intense, extremely intense person. And he served in China, India, and Africa, actually, all 3 locations, but remembered most for his ministry in Africa. And he was very driven and demanding of his colleagues. He would get up very, very early and work very, very hard. And if anybody on the mission team took a break, or wanted a little vacation time, he'd jump on them. He's the guy that said, I would rather run, oh boy, a rescue mission 3 feet from hell, something like that, than to, sorry, I can't remember. Anybody remember that statement? He wanted to be right there where the flames were, rescuing people from the grasp of hell. And if you weren't as intense as he was, you were lazy. Some of you may have worked with people like that before. You can't keep up with them. There's no way you're going to keep up with them. And they think you're lazy because you can't or you won't. Listen, how many of you would be kind of type A person? I'm not saying you're like him. I'm just saying, how many of you are fairly intense people? Like type A, you're a driver, okay, you're self-driven, somebody gives you the ball and you'll know what to do with it. Okay. There may be others like that that maybe haven't discovered that completely yet. Let me just say this to you folks. Be careful when you work with colleagues that you don't expect everybody to be who you are. And that's true for you who are on the other side of the spectrum as well. If you're a little more shy, laid back, you need to be careful also that you don't criticize those who are more intense. Because God uses all kinds of people. He wires us all differently. He puts us together for a reason. Yeah.
I love the quote. It was, someone to live within the sound of the church of Chapel Bell. I want to run
A yard of hell, okay. Yeah. Read that one more time, nice and loud.
someone to live within the sound of church or Chapel Bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell.
Right. Good. And again, thinking of him, if you weren't there within that yard of hell right next to him, then somehow you didn't measure up. So this was hard for his colleagues. Understand that not everybody has the same level of intensity, the same energy level. Some people require more sleep than others, right? He survived on very little sleep, which actually became a health issue later on. There's even suspicion that he used some medical aids that were not appropriate dealing with that. How many of you can typically get by on 4 or 5 hours of sleep? And I admire you guys. Who are the people that I really like 7 or 8? I need 7 or 8. What are you guys doing in Bible college? I'm one of those that needs a little more sleep. I can get by on 6 or so, but I usually take my afternoon. A nap, yeah. I learned to do that in Brazil and never, but do you like to nap? You do it in class too? Okay, good. Yeah, he's sitting over there, so if I don't catch him with my peripheral vision, he's sleeping, and if somebody just raise your hand or throw something at him, yeah.
If he falls asleep, I'll just walk up.
If he falls asleep,
Yeah.
why would you want to walk up?
Because then he'll wake up.
You have to think about that one. All right. Anyway, there were suspicions that he was exercising abuse of certain medical aids in the end to keep going. It's not fully substantiated, but look, when all the dust is settled, God used this man. Okay, yes. You know, I'm not sure he was. I don't know if I've ever even asked that question before. Does anybody know from studying CT stuff if he was married? You're wondering about his wife, how she fared through all this? Yeah, well, you can see that perhaps if he was married, she didn't fare very well because she's not in the picture anymore. I don't know. I don't know. Yes, did you find out? Oh, yes. In fact, there's a picture of her. Yeah, thank you. I have a picture of her for another class that I use. Yes, he did. Now, I don't know how their marriage went. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, they have a big family. That's right. Thank you. The fog is lifting. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. There's so many people to remember. That's a good question. Yeah. Fellas, if you're type A, don't leave your wife, your life too. Don't leave your wife far behind. I walk fast. And my wife and I used to park our car down in downtown Carapu, Brazil, where we live, and we go to the store, and I'm on a time schedule. Okay, I cannot walk slowly. And every so often I've been walking along, and I hear this voice behind me, honey, you mind if I walk with you? Oops. So now I hold her hand. Got a shoulder joint once, but I just have a hard time. I'm an intense person. You probably notice even the way I teach. I cannot just stand up here and talk about speech, but I'm just calling to serve the Lord faithfully. I burn energy. We got just a couple minutes. You know something? I'm going to wait on this gentleman. What's his name? Anybody? Not you. Anybody else know what his name is? Just think of the first two letters of the alphabet, and you'll have a good start. A.B. Simpson. All right, we'll come back to him next time with the teams out and so forth. So we did pretty well today. Thank you very much.